Is Erdogan trying to start a war with Greece? That might sound a little sensationalistic, but that's what the Daily Mail asked in an article they published this week. And why does the Daily Mail ask this? Because President Erdogan gave a speech at Technofest this week where he made a few comments that could have been construed as a vague threat of war. Former diplomat and director of EDAM, Sinan Ülgen, will be here to make sense of it all in just a little bit, but a few details first. Technofest is primarily an aviation and aerospace expo, and Turks tend to be really proud of their aerospace industry. So a speech that would stoke national pride is not really out of place there. But what stoked the tensions here was Erdogan's warning to Greece. Speaking about military presence on certain Greek islands, Erdogan said, "When the time comes, we will do what is necessary." So that does sound like a vague threat. Now, Turkey and Greece are two full-fledged NATO member states that do not get along. Turkey and Greece have routinely engaged in mock dogfights and sometimes even real dogfights over the Aegean. But this isn't some centuries-old gripe that have over time turned into a tradition. Turkey and Greece have some legitimate territorial disputes. Simply put, Turkey and Greece do not agree how far Greece's territorial seas extend out of Greece's many islands. Turkey also disputes Greece's claim to its exclusive economic zone that follows Greece's continental shelf. Much like territorial borders, Greece would have exclusive access to all the resources in these waters, everything from fish to natural gas deposits thought to be in ample supply in the Mediterranean. Sinan Ülgen will be with us in just a little bit to break things down, but let's get a recap of the last diplomatic crisis between Turkey and Greece.
AKP chairman and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had harsh words for the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis after the cabinet meeting on the 23rd of May. "Mitsotakis does not exist for me anymore," he said during the AKP group meeting and warned, "Don't try to dance with Turkey. You will fail." The new status between the states is a far cry from earlier this year. On the 13th of March, the two leaders, Mitsotakis and Erdogan, had lunch at the Vahdettin Mansion in Istanbul, whereafter both parties had reached a consensus for increased cooperation between the nations. A mere 40 days later, diplomacy between the two nations is on the brink of failing. The tension started on the 9th of May when both Greece and Turkey, NATO allies, blamed each other for the invasion of airspace, which led Turkey to withdraw from the NATO Tigers Meet 2020 hosted by Greece. On May 17th, after his meeting with President Biden, Prime Minister Mitsotakis addressed Congress, and while he did not mention Turkey by name, urged to block the sale of F-16s. This is coming at the heels of Greece's potential entry into the F-35 program and its acquisition of 18 French Rafale fighters, threatening to achieve air superiority over the Aegean. Athens-based journalist Stelios Berberakis commented on the Turco-Greek relations. "In my 35 years of journalism, have I never heard such harsh words. Especially the Turkish side and politicians are to blame for the escalation," he added.
Joining me now, former diplomat and director of EDAM, Sinan Ülgen. Mr. Ülgen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Sir, so for the folks at home who might not have a historical context for what is going on right now, can you give us a little short and brief history of Turkish-Greek relations? Why can't Turkey and Greece get along?
Well, the fundamental reason is that these two countries have a range of disputes that have remained unresolved. And these disputes, the origin of these disputes can be traced back to the last days of the Ottoman Empire. And therefore, it's really been over a century that some of these disputes have been left unaddressed. And this is not because of a lack of enthusiasm or effort. There have been many efforts in the past to address these disputes, but unfortunately, many of them proved to be futile at the end of the day. So now we're left with a range of disputes that have to do with the territory, with different views on the territorial shelf, in the Aegean Sea, in the East Med, on the flight information regions regarding the islands, on the treatment of minorities, on the demilitarization of these islands, even some, property claims regarding some of these islands. So the question of Cyprus, that also remains unresolved. So there are all these issues out there that provide for a very volatile backdrop to the bilateral relationship. And therefore it goes down to how leaders on both sides want to make use of these differences. We have seen episodes where leaders, and here I think one must recall the efforts by Papandreou and Ismail Cem, the former foreign minister of Turkey, who indeed created an environment of rapprochement between Turkey and Greece in the late 1990s. But there have been other episodes a couple of years back in the mid-90s. The two countries went almost to war over property claims of a range of small islands. So it's really, it really depends on how the leadership on both sides try to make use of these differences. They can, in a way, foster, accelerate the pace of rapprochement, but they can and have in the past as well done the exact opposite of instrumentalizing these differences for domestic purposes.
And, sir, when we think of Greece and Turkey, they're perhaps the only two NATO members who routinely engage in dogfights over the Aegean. Why are they constantly engaging in dogfights over the Aegean? Is this simply an extension of the tensions, or is there some sort of political purpose behind that?
No, it's not just an illustration of the existing political tension. There's another reason. The fundamental reason is that according to general principles of international law, the airspace that is recognized for islands is delimited by the territorial waters of those islands. And in general, this is 6 miles. So islands have the ones that are not, where the delimitation is not contested. The islands have a territorial water that extends to 6 miles. And this is exactly the scope of the air space across, on top of the island that belongs to that is part of the sovereignty of that island. However, Greece recognizes 10 miles across the islands as its own airspace. And this is something that is not recognized by Turkey. So therefore, most of these dogfights happen in that contested zone between 6 and 10 miles, where Greece believes that it is part of its own airspace, and Turkey contests that interpretation and calls for the implementation of generally agreed practices and norms, which is to limit that airspace to 6 miles. So as a result, we often see Turkish jets entering that space between 6 and 10 miles. And this is the area where we see these type of dogfights. And the reason why that is the case is that Turkey and Greece are the only NATO countries that are exposed to this type of dispute.
I see, sir. And while we're on the subject of dogfights, let's go to the king of dogfighters. Turkey has been trying to buy F-16s from the United States despite being under sanctions. Now, recently, Prime Minister Mitsotakis spoke to Congress earlier this year and urged them to not sell F-16s to Turkey. What does this potential F-16 deal mean for Turkey and Greece?
Well, the reason why Turkey lodged this request with the United States is related to the intent to modernize Turkey's air force. back, a few years ago, the plan was that the modernization of the Turkish Air Force would actually be based on two components, two platforms. The first platform was going to be the F-35, which is a fifth generation stealth plane. And the second platform was going to be Turkey's own project. It's a national project, TFX. And therefore, the TFX project would replace the aging F-16 fleet. However, since then, and as a result of the government's decision to purchase the S-400 system from Russia, the US imposed sanctions on Turkey, CAATSA sanctions, and also essentially canceled Turkey's participation in the F-35 program and annulled the delivery of F-35s to Turkey. And therefore, this one major component of the modernization plan has essentially become dysfunctional. So Turkey has now reassessed, and as a result, it now wants to modernize its F-16 fleet. And this is the fundamental reason why Turkish authorities have initiated discussions with the US in order to get a package for buying new F-16 and for modernizing part of the F-16 fleet held by Turkey. The strategic reason is that across the Aegean, Greece has engaged in a rather ambitious plan to modernize its air fleet as well, which includes purchases of modern warplanes from France, a number of Rafale planes, but also modernized F-16s and also F-35 from the United States. So in order to remain strategically at the same level as Greece, Turkey wants also to get these modernized planes from the United States.
I see. And lastly, sir, let's touch on the news of the week. President Erdogan made a little bit of a tiff this week when he went to Technofest and Expo and said something to the effect of, "You occupying the islands does not bind us. When the time arrives, we will do what is necessary." Now, those are some very strong words, but is Erdogan trying to start a war like the Daily Mail called, or is this just tough talk for an audience? What are your thoughts?
Well, let's hope it's the second, because if we look at this issue, there are, Turkey does indeed have some legitimate claims about a range of islands which still need to be defined. But the way to solve this dispute is not by way of military conflict. This is not done at this day and age. So the way to solve this conflict should be through diplomatic negotiations. And if the diplomatic negotiations prove to yield no clear conclusion, then there's always the option of going to international adjudication, to international courts. So one thing is to say that Turkey does not agree with the current state of affairs, that it believes that Greece has seized the opportunity to extend its control over some of the islands, and Turkey finds this wrongful. This is an argument, but the way to advance this argument it would be, as I said, through diplomatic negotiations and ultimately through international courts. So I certainly hope that this is what Erdogan has meant, because really it's very difficult to imagine a military conflict between Turkey and Greece, two NATO allies.
I see. As you said, let us hope. Mr. Ülgen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and thank you for making sense of it all.
Thank you for hosting me, Murat Bey.
And folks, that's it for our little segment. Thank you for joining us. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel and go ahead and hit that like button if you feel like it. And remember that we always have a Patreon and the link is available down in the description. Thank you for joining us.